Welcome to Out of the Park. Today's guest is one of the all-time greats out of Somerset High School, class of 1976, Doug Chapman. Doug is here today to discuss the origins, development, growth, and situation today of the Somerset Athletic Hall of Fame. Doug was the founder of the institution and has done yeoman work to keep the Hall of Fame visible and viable in today's world. Without further ado, I present to our audience, deep in the heart of Somerset Village, Station 9 here, SATV, my guest, Doug Chapman.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me. My pleasure. You mentioned about the Hall of Fame, and we started it. The first year of putting it together was actually 1985, and I wanted to actually get it going a few years before that, but it was just an idea. And I think one of the things that you learn is that when you want to bring an idea forward, particularly something within an institution, is you really need to have all of your ducks in a row. So the first thing I did after I was just getting lip service was I went to the Boosters Club. Roger Chassie was the president, and the Boosters Club decided that they would want to be the sponsor of the Hall of Fame. And then it was going out and getting Mr. Frank Kilgrew, the former principal and superintendent, and Mr. Carl McDermott, the former principal, Mr. Richard Mahoney, former vice principal and athletic director, and the current principal at the time, Mr. Sal Petrillo, and they all got together and we formed the committee and then went before the school committee and said, this is something that we would like to do. And obviously, it's a little bit different when you have the leaders of probably about 50 years of education in Somerset going before the school committee saying, yes, this is something that we want to do, rather than just somebody who was a coach in his 20s.
Well, they were giants, Doug, in the field of education, great administrators, great teachers, and great leaders in our community in Somerset. You were surrounded with great company.
Well, one of the things, obviously, Somerset has had for so many years is a great reputation in education. And I think when you're talking about, somebody like Mr. Kilgrew, and then you had Mr. O'Toole before him, Mr. McDermott, Mr. Petrillo, Mr. Kaler, Ed Sullivan, these are all people who really formed that foundation that reputation has continued on. And I think the thing with the Hall of Fame that I really wanted to do was I wanted to make sure that people of the current time knew about what had happened previously and could build upon that, knowing what great tradition Somerset had. When I was in school in the 1970s, I don't think anybody realized how great Somerset athletics was, even like during the 50s, when you were the shortstop for a championship team under Jack Knievy. We had in 57, 58, we had the state champion football team, 48 and 54, the state champion basketball teams. And I don't think people were aware of that unless they had a relative who actually played on it. And so this would be a way to make sure that those things would be preserved, would be recognized, and the current students, the current athletes, could use that, could build upon that tradition, and it would hopefully be a motivating factor for them as well. And one of the great things was that when we finally got it going was the location, where when you're coming in from the Luther Avenue entrance, you actually have to walk through the Hall of Fame to get to an event going on in the gym. And so when you're going to an event, it's in a perfect location right now. And for the students who are being picked up after their sports practices, a lot of times they're waiting in the Hall of Fame area. So they're checking out the pictures, they're checking out the plaques, and it's really a good way of letting people know what went on in the past, give people something to shoot for, and also let them know that they're really part of a very strong athletic tradition.
Doug, could you comment on some of the photos we have? I know in the first inducted class, Jerry Remy was part of that in '85. I see his picture with you covering him when he was with the Angels. I see Don Zimmer, you're covering. And of course, I see you with the tennis. Would you comment on these pictures we have for the audience?
Well, I was actually hired as the sports editor of the Spectator while I was still in high school. And I had been the sports editor of the Breeze, the school paper, which was printed by the Spectator. And it would be laid out down there. And they called me up one day and they wanted me to come down. And I thought something was wrong because I had just been there and already did the layout. And they offered me a job writing about Somerset sports. And that was when I was a freshman. And about 2 years later, they made me the sports editor. So when I was about 16, 17 years old, which is around the time when Jerry Remy got called up to the Angels, I got to go up to Fenway Park and write about Jerry Remy and be in the dugout in the press box. And so that's a picture with Don Zimmer and Darrell Johnson. That was from 1975, the year the Red Sox got to the World Series. And then, of course, a picture with a much younger me and a much younger Rem Dog.
Now, Darrell Johnson was the manager. Zimmer was his third base coach.
Yeah.
He was involved in the yelling to Dennis Doyle. He was on third, no, no, no. And Doyle tagged up, was thrown out by 10 feet because he thought Zimmer said, go, go, go. Interesting situation.
Well, Zimmer just had his 81st birthday, and if you look at his record as Red Sox manager, his record was pretty good, but most people, I think, more look toward the collapse of '78 and then that incident with Denny Doyle. And he's not looked upon as favorably as his record would indicate.
I saw Don as a very young Brooklyn Dodger in 1954, a backup man, supposedly the heir apparent to the job of Pee Wee Reese, and that was Ebbets Field. Very, very colorful ballpark, but Zimmer rode the bench that particular year. So I do remember him as a young, trim individual.
Well, that also leads us to a Somerset Hall of Fame coach, Bill Kearns, who was the basketball coach in the 50s, still to this day is a scout for the Seattle Mariners. And I think he's probably about 87, 88 years old. Mike Mahoney recently said that he can still shoot his age in golf, which is pretty darn good. Yeah. But he was in the Dodgers system, went off to war. They thought he might be the starting shortstop, and then Pee Wee Reese snuck in under the bar and made it all the way to the Baseball Hall of Fame. So another connection between the Brooklyn Dodgers and Somerset Athletics.
I know Bill made it as high as AA with Fort Worth in the Texas League. He was a tall, angular shortstop built along the lines of Marty Marion, the great Cardinal shortstop. And, of course, Pee Wee Reese could have been signed by Boston. He could have been a Boston Red Sox shortstop, but at the time, the player-manager was Joe Cronin, and he was a person strong on ego, wanted to keep his position as shortstop, when really the game had passed him by, Doug. Couldn't go to his left or right as nimbly as he did in younger days, but he said he could still do it, so they weren't interested in getting Reese.
He was the manager, so he was going to make the decision.
Right, and they were going to buy the whole team, the Louisville Colonels, just to get Reese's contract, but they muffed it, and he ended up being drafted by the Dodgers. And, of course, Hall of Fame career, as you pointed out, with Brooklyn. Okay, the Athletic Hall of Fame we have here, as you're the founding father of that, plus the Chief Executive Officer, Chairman of the Selection Committee. And we have your selection and induction here.
Which was this past induction.
April 30th, 2011. And that was to signify a coach, even though still active, as a senior mentor, 25 plus years, which I think was an amendment to the original Constitution, but it was needed because sometimes the coaches can outlive the whole program. Not that we wish any ill fortune on you, but it was a good amendment to the original Constitution.
Well, one of the things probably to mention about our Hall of Fame, which from day one has always been a public Hall of Fame. So anybody from the public can nominate anyone who they deem deserves some consideration. So it's not just the committee who's coming up with names. I mean, we obviously scour the yearbooks and we look at the yearbooks when a class becomes eligible, but we actually like it when the public sends us nominations, and particularly if they send us information.
Well,
And we still have about 150 names.
I'm
on our
sorry
list.
that I missed your first 20 years. I was not a part of the committee, but I was thankful when asked by you the past 5 years to be on the selection committee. It's a very educationally sound program. One can learn an awful lot. I think it's much easier being a coach and a player than it is to be on that selection committee. It's a very serious task that the 12 individuals have each, well, it's every other year now.
Every other year now. For the first 20 years, we did it every year. And then to make sure we didn't get watered down or putting in too many people all at once, we decided to go to every other year. So there will not be one in 2012, but the next induction will be in 2013.
Right, which is pretty good. I'm a person who is more familiar with the older players going back to the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but I can be a good resource person for, the committee on individuals who played in the era of the 40s, 50s, 60s, maybe even the 70s and 80s. But the current era, I'd say the last 30 years, I would not be as significant a selector as the other individuals on your committee, but it's a privilege to be there.
Not to age you, but I think you might be the oldest potential voter or the oldest selection committee member on the team. So we actually are happy that you know the older era, because we obviously need somebody who goes back as far as you do to even when you were in elementary school going to games.
Well, I appreciate the confidence that you have in me. Thank you. Now, can we swing into journalism, because you alluded to that a moment ago. When ice hockey started in December of '72 as a high school sport in southeastern Mass, Somerset was one of the 8 original schools to be in this Bristol County League. And I know when you were in high school, you covered us freshman, sophomore year, and the coverage that we received, not only in the Breeze, the school paper, but in the Spectator, was phenomenal. Also, we got great coverage in the paper of record, which was the New Bedford Standard Times, since all the games were played in the New Bedford rink, the Moby Dick Arena, that first year. So they were strong. And later on, the Taunton Gazette covered a lot of games. And of course, when Driscoll Rink opened in year number 2, the Fall River Herald News covered us extensively. And I think it did an awful lot to sell the game of ice hockey at the high school level, because we were getting crowds 700-800 per game in these local rinks. It was, standing room only. And I believe it was through the efforts of you and fellow reporters with the local paper. So on behalf of all the coaches and players back in those days, 40 years ago, we thank you.
Well, it was a good time to be involved with hockey. '72, the Bruins won until last year their Stanley Cup, and you had the Bobby Orr hockey boom in the area, and probably the '70s and early '80s were really the prime peak of interest in high school hockey in this area. And as you mentioned, games would sell out. Somerset Conley games, which were always wars, be standing room only. People lining up outside the Driscoll Rink in the cold and the snow to get into those games, and then some of the craziness that sometimes went on in the games. And I was fortunate because obviously I really loved hockey, and got to cover it for the Spectator. They really took it. If you look at it, it was kind of interesting that when I was 16 years old, they made me the sports editor. And so I was still in high school, and they would give me 4 to 6 pages to say, fill it with sports. So I basically could do almost whatever I wanted and write as much as I wanted and cover what I wanted. That was a lot of responsibility to give to somebody of that age, but you know, I hope it went well at the time, and I think it did. Certainly there was a lot of interest in the paper. I also had a column which some people might have deemed being controversial because I was never shy about giving my opinions.
Only on the officiating.
Well, now being a college tennis official myself, I have to be a little bit careful on that. But the officiating, that was one of the problems I think in those days, was that the level of play quickly grew beyond the level of the officiating. So you had a higher level of play on the ice, and you had a lot of people who were still learning to be officials. And hopefully that's evened out a little bit over the years. But some of those games with Falmouth and Barnstable and, as we said, the Conley games, that was just terrific hockey, and it was really a great time to be involved. And of course, then I went to Boston University, which is one of the premier hockey programs in the country. And I'll tell a little story. I won't tell you which one of your players, but I wrote something that one of your players didn't like when we were both in high school. And it got to be a heated discussion, and I remember saying to him that, well, your career is done when high school is over. I'm going to the NHL. And I did spend 11 years covering the Boston Bruins in the NHL. And that picture there is actually from the last game at the old Boston Garden. So I did get to cover the last game at the Garden and the first game at what at the time was the Fleet Center, and now it's gone back to being the Garden again. So 11 years in the NHL, that was probably about 8 or 9 of them were fun, and the last few, the Bruins weren't spending any money or having trying to put a real good product on the ice.
And the newspaper, Doug, excuse me, was the Providence Journal. Right.
So I was at the Providence Journal for 19 years, and the first probably 7 or 8 years they had a Massachusetts edition, which I was the sports editor of. We had a bureau in Fall River, then it moved to Somerset. And but then the last like 11, 12 years I did mostly professional international sports. I covered all of the soccer. I got to cover 4 World Cups. I covered the 1990 World Cup in Italy. I was in Italy for 5 weeks and then got to go to Wimbledon for the last week of Wimbledon. 1998, I was, I think one of the pictures, one of the previous pictures was that one there that was the World Cup final between Brazil and France in Paris, 1998. Above that, I got to cover 13 Wimbledons.
Wow, that's amazing.
Which for a tennis fanatic is a great place to be. That was before that picture was before the 1992 men's final, and I did not borrow that shirt from Bud Collins. But I did wear it so that if the two of us were sitting next to one another as representatives of the New England press, that people would have to wear sunglasses as they walked by.
Very colorful, Doug, very colorful.
That was done on purpose, because that's not usually me. But yeah, there was a lot of, I got to do a lot of great things in those 19 years, and you know, I think some people might have even known me more for my coverage of soccer than of hockey or tennis. And because of my coverage of soccer going up to the World Cup in the U.S., I was inducted into the Soccer Hall of Fame in 1995.
Where is it located?
The Soccer Hall of Fame for New England is located in off of Gano Street in Providence and Fox Point. And in 2000, I was the Rhode Island Sports Writer of the Year by the National Sports Writers and Sportscasters Association, and that's Rick Riley presenting me with that award in North Carolina.
Sports Illustrated writer?
Sports Illustrated, now ESPN. And I was also the National Soccer Writer of the Year at that time.
That's terrific.
And that led me to, I actually bought into Charlton Athletic, and that's what these two pictures are. The top one is, I'm on the field at the Valley, which is the name of the stadium in southeast London. And about 1992, I became a major shareholder in Charlton. And so that was up until recently when a lot of the team was bought out by new investors. And down below that's before the game in an English pub before playing Manchester United. And Charlton scored 3 goals in the last 10 minutes and tied Manchester United 3-3. So it was nice that the Charlton Athletic were in the English Premier League for 9 years, and it was really nice to be involved in that, going over to see games, going to, sitting in the director's box, going to the annual meetings, and obviously my accent was a little bit different than the other people who were there.
Just one note, who was the best of the men's tennis players that you covered at Wimbledon, in your judgment?
Well, I saw in person 6 out of 7 of Pete Sampras' Wimbledon finals.
Okay.
And so I would have to say that the years that I was there would have to definitely be Pete Sampras.
And may I ask you the women's best that you saw, best?
Steffi Graf.
Steffi Graf,
Graf,
okay.
yeah, she may be the best woman player of all time, although Margaret Court, who still has by far the record for Grand Slams, doesn't get as much notice in that discussion as she should. 24 singles Grand Slams, which was 10 more than what the men's record was at the time, and 62 including doubles, which is even more than Martina Navratilova.
Wow. Well, you did an awful lot to popularize the game with your coverage in the Journal of Tennis and, of course, soccer also. And already ice hockey was embedded in this area, but the other two sports, world renowned, were brought, into our living rooms on the TV, and with your newspaper coverage. Fantastic work on your part. Now, Somerset High School, Doug, you've been the coach there for many, many years as a youngster starting there, and now just knocking at the door of senior citizenship. Still the coach. A lot of great games, a lot of great players. If you could just take us down memory lane for a moment.
Well, I was a teenager when I was hired. Carl McDermott and Dick Mahoney basically recruited me to be the coach. And I remember, since I was still a student at Boston University, Dick Mahoney said to me, "Well, how many years do you think you might want to do this?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, 20, 30." And he laughed and he says, "Well, we hope you're still doing it when you graduate from college." So
well done, well said.
But I was a teenager when I was hired, and they may not, with all these rules and regulations and things today, that might not happen. There were players on my first teams who were my teammates in high school, and this is now year 34. And I think as far as varsity coach, that puts me in seniority. I think only Richard Bernardo, with I think 39 years in cross country, is the only one who's coached a single sport as a varsity coach.
Richard goes
longer.
back to class of 1960 graduate, Somerset, great coach of cross country, and of course the track programs also.
Well, I think one of the other interesting things too is that the tennis courts are obviously going to be replaced and desperately need to be replaced.
Could you fill our viewers in on what the progress will be with the construction going on in the near future?
Well, actually, the first thing that's going to be built are the new tennis courts, because they actually will be built this coming summer. And one of the issues was that there's no other place to send us, the boys or the girls tennis teams, now that there are 2 teams. There's no other tennis courts in town. In 1980, when I was coaching, there were 22 courts, including 6 indoor at the Somerset Racket Club, that people could play on. Now, the only public courts are at the high school. So the school would have had to pay to bus us and pay for us to play somewhere, 2 teams, for practices and all matches. And the new courts are going to go behind the Sunoco station and just off behind the fire station, where the faculty parking lot is, across from the auditorium and the planetarium. So it's not as if they have to knock anything down to build the courts, they just have to relocate the parking. So when this season ends, the new high school is going to be built on the baseball field and the tennis courts. So when the spring season ends this year, they'll tear up the courts, and then in the summer they'll start building the new courts. So that'll be the first thing that'll be built for the new Somerset Berkeley Regional High School. We'll actually have, I think, 2 seasons on the new courts before the new school actually opens.
What is the surface, excuse me, Doug, what surface will the courts be constructed on?
It'll be similar to the U.S. Open. It'll be a blacktop surface, 6-inch base, and the color scheme will be different. It'll be There'll be blue courts with a green background instead of green courts with a red background. And one of the things that's been found is that you don't want to do green and red because they heat up under the sun at different levels, and the red heats up faster. So when you look at old courts and you see cracks right down the line, that's because that's where the green and the red meet, and the red heats up faster, so it pulls them apart. The blue and the green heat up at the same level, so a lot of the cracking issues that we've had and other courts have had should not be an issue with the new color scheme, which is also better optically for playing on. But there'll be 6 courts, and we'll really look forward to it. And what I wanted to mention was my career as a coach started on the courts before the current courts. So the courts that I started playing on, which were built around 1970 and went to about 81, I actually coached on those, and so it looks like I'm going to, knock on wood, outlast the current facility, which really desperately needs replacing.
Wow, boy, that's history, living history.
When you outlast the facility.
Wow. How about the teams that you've had in the 34 years? I know you've had some great teams. How about recent years? Any that stick out above the others?
Well, we did win in 2005. We had a great team with Matt Charest, who's our all-time victory leader. He's now the coach at Durfee High School. Nate Eleuterio was the number 2 player on that team, and he's in a top 10 in victories all time. He's now the tennis coach at Apponequet. So it's nice to get 2 former players who are both coaching locally, and I understand we're going to play against both of them this spring, which will be nice. 2008 and 2009, we also won the EAC championship. This past year, unfortunately for us, we had our streak broken of qualifying for 21 consecutive tournaments. We missed by 1. If we had won 1 more, we would have kept the streak alive. But I believe we've made the tournament 31 out of my 33 previous years. And when getting into being inducted into the Hall of Fame, I learned from the Boston Globe that I have more wins in tennis than any tennis coach in the history of high school tennis in Massachusetts, which...
Wow, that's congratulations from SATV9.
Well, you have to...
I'm in distinguished company here, royalty.
Well, you have to be around for a long time.
That's for sure.
And you have to have a lot of great players.
And I love what you're doing.
Well, yeah, it's true. But I've certainly been blessed with having a lot of great kids who are not only great kids, which makes it really easy to coach, but the fact that they've also had some really great players makes it even easier to coach. So we've been blessed in Somerset with a lot of really good tennis players, a lot of kids who enjoy the sport, a lot who've gone on and played in college, and now, as we mentioned with Matt and Nate, 2 guys who are now coaching at the high school level as well.
Well, that's the ultimate testament to your leadership as a coach and as an instructor, that fellas who played for you would want to emulate you and be teachers and coaches of the game itself. I want to thank you very much, Doug, for appearing with us on SATV9 in studio. It's been a tremendous program with you here, and I want to wish you continued success with the Hall of Fame, with the coaching of tennis. I know you're retired pretty much from journalism, but I want to thank you very much for being our guest today. So this is Bob Souza from historic Main Street in Somerset Village. See you next time as we'll be rounding third and heading home. Thank you.